Army scout punches corrupt sheriff. What the town does next will amaze you. Caleb Riker rode into the town of Dustrock as the twin suns of the frontier planet began to sink low over the horizon. The air was dry and sharp, carrying the smell of sand and metal from the distant mining stations. Dustrock had always been a small town, tucked into the rocky hills of the frontier, but lately it had become a place of fear. The people moved quietly, eyes downcast, as if every glance could bring trouble. Caleb, a tall man with sun-beaten skin and sharp, steady eyes, could feel the tension the moment he crossed the wooden bridge that marked the town's edge. His horse, a rugged creature with a coat the color of dark ash, snorted nervously. Caleb patted its neck. "Easy, boy," he said. He had been an army scout for years, traveling dangerous stretches of unclaimed land, and nothing about this unsettled him. But there was something different here, something heavy. The town looked normal at first glance, the wooden storefronts, the wagons parked along the dirt street, and the faded signs swinging in the wind. But Caleb noticed the subtle signs of control. Deputies leaned lazily against posts, their hands resting on the butts of their weapons, watching every move of the townsfolk. Windows were shuttered early, and children peeked from behind doors and corners. Dustrock had a sheriff, of course, Sheriff Brannon. A man with a face that seemed carved to warn, a man whose smile never reached his eyes, and everyone in town feared him. Caleb rode past the central square, noting the few people still walking about. A merchant tried to arrange crates outside his shop, but one of the sheriff's deputies strode over, waving a hand sharply. "Step away from that," the man barked. "Orders from Sheriff Brannon, those supplies are now claimed." The merchant's face turned pale. "But I paid for those," he said. "They're mine." The deputy only laughed. "Sheriff says otherwise. Move along or you'll learn what happens to those who resist." Caleb's hand instinctively rested near his belt. He did not like bullies, especially not ones who hurt people who had done nothing wrong. He walked forward, boots crunching on the dry dirt. "That's enough," he said, voice calm but firm. "Those crates belong to the man, let them be." The deputy looked up at him, then down at his boots. "And who are you?" he asked, suspicion dripping from his words. "Some soldier come to play hero in a town that isn't yours?" Caleb's eyes did not waver. "I'm someone who doesn't like injustice, that's who I am." The deputy's hand twitched toward his blaster. Caleb noticed, but he didn't flinch. He had seen worse in the army, and he knew a man could often stop trouble with steady courage rather than a quick shot. The deputy hesitated, unsure if he was willing to risk a direct conflict in front of the town. Finally, he stepped back, muttering something under his breath, and the merchant quickly reclaimed his crates. Caleb moved on, letting the merchant give him a grateful nod. But the moment left a ripple in the quiet tension of Dustrock. People started peeking from windows again, curious about this stranger who had stood up to the sheriff's men. Caleb could feel their eyes on him, a mix of hope and fear. He made his way to the saloon, a place that always held news, rumors, and sometimes trouble. The swinging doors creaked as he entered, and the murmur of conversation dimmed slightly. The bartender, a stout man with graying hair, wiped a glass nervously. "Evening, stranger," the bartender said cautiously. "Not many outsiders come through here these days." "Evening," Caleb replied. "I'm looking for Sheriff Brannon. I need to talk to him." The bartender's hand froze. You don't want to do that." "Sheriff doesn't take kindly to strangers questioning him." Caleb gave a slight smile. "I've been around enough to know the difference between a warning and fear. I'm here anyway." The bartender hesitated, then motioned toward a door at the back. "You'll find him there. But be careful." Caleb pushed through the saloon doors leading to the sheriff's office. Inside, the room smelled of dust and old leather. Sheriff Brannon sat behind a heavy wooden desk, fingers steepled, eyes cold and sharp. He looked up as Caleb entered, a faint smirk forming on his face. Well, Brannon said. "Another soldier thinks he can lecture me about justice. What brings you to Dustrock, mister?" "Riker, Caleb Riker," he said. "I'm an army scout, but I'm not here for official business. I'm here for justice. I've heard about how you run this town, and I've seen it already today." Brannon leaned back in his chair, his smirk growing. "Justice? In my town? You're in the wrong place if you think the people here answer to anyone but me." Caleb's jaw tightened. "You can rule by fear, Brannon, but fear doesn't last. People want to live free, they want fairness, and if you won't give it, someone else will." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "You sound dangerous, maybe too dangerous for Dustrock. Maybe you need a lesson in respect." Caleb stayed calm, He knew that words alone might not stop Brannon from acting, but he also knew the townsfolk were watching. One wrong move could lead to panic or violence, and he didn't want innocent people hurt. As the sun set outside, painting the town in red-orange light, Caleb left the office with a clear purpose. He would not let Brannon's fear rule continue, but he needed allies, people who were brave enough to stand with him. And he knew that convincing the people of Dustrock to act would be harder than facing the sheriff himself. Caleb spent the next hours walking through the town, observing and listening. He saw a miner struggling to carry his tools past a deputy, a woman hurriedly closing her shop, and children hiding behind crates as the deputies passed. The people were scared, but there was a glimmer of hope in their eyes whenever they saw Caleb. He stopped at the edge of the town, looking out at the rocky hills where rumors of strange alien artifacts and old army technology were whispered among the settlers. Caleb knew the town's problems were not only about Brannon. There were forces here, unknown and hidden, that could change the balance if discovered. But first, the immediate threat had to be addressed. That night, Caleb camped just outside Dustrock, keeping watch over the town. He prepared quietly, sharpening his tools, checking his weapons, and studying the layout of the streets. He understood one thing clearly: Dustrock needed a spark to remind its people they did not have to live in fear, and he was ready to be that spark. In the early morning, the town was quiet. The streets were empty, except for a few early risers and the ever-watchful deputies. Caleb moved with purpose, observing the town from the shadows. He noticed a deputy approach a trader again, demanding payment for supplies that were not his. This time, Caleb did not wait. He stepped into the street, voice calm but commanding. "That's enough," he said again, louder this time. "Leave the man be." The deputy spun, hand on his weapon. "Who are you to tell me what to do?" Caleb's eyes met his steadily. "I am someone who will not stand by while innocent people suffer. Step back, or I will make you." For a moment, the deputy hesitated, unsure if this soldier meant harm or warning. Caleb's presence, steady and fearless, seemed to give the town a moment of courage, too. People peeked from behind shutters and corners, watching a man stand against the oppression they had endured silently for years. The deputy stepped back, muttering threats under his breath, but he left the trader alone. Caleb knew this was just the beginning. Brannon would not forgive such defiance. The sheriff's power was built on fear, and fear could only be broken when someone dared to challenge it openly. Caleb Riker had taken the first step, and Dustrock had begun to stir. By midday, the town was buzzing quietly. The news of the army scout who had stood up to a deputy spread from street to street, shop to shop. Whispers of hope mingled with anxiety. Caleb walked among them, speaking quietly to those brave enough to listen, offering words of encouragement. The people began to feel something they had not felt in a long time, that change might be possible. As the suns climbed higher, Caleb could see Sheriff Brannon observing from his office, face shadowed and lips tight. The sheriff's smirk had vanished, replaced by a flicker of concern. Caleb knew that the confrontation, when it came, would be inevitable, and when it came, the whole town would have to decide where they stood. Caleb sat on a wooden crate in the town square, looking around. Dustrock was small, dusty, and worn down by years of fear, but it was also full of people with courage buried deep inside them, waiting for someone to show them the way. Caleb Riker was ready to do that. He did not know yet what the sheriff would do next. He did not know how the town would respond. But one thing was certain: the first spark had been lit, and Dustrock would never be the same. The morning sun rose over Dustrock, casting long shadows across the dusty streets. Caleb Riker sat atop his horse near the town square, scanning the streets with sharp eyes. He had spent the night observing, thinking, and planning. Dustrock was small, but it was full of people who had been silent for too long. Caleb knew that standing up to Sheriff Brannon would not be simple. The sheriff was clever, cruel, and well-liked by fear alone. But Caleb also knew that fear could break when courage acted boldly. The town began to stir. Merchants opened their shops slowly, peering nervously at the square. Children ran to school with anxious glances, and the deputies patrolled with hands on their blasters. Caleb watched a group of miners walking toward the mines, their faces tense. They had suffered under Brannon's rule for years, paying unfair taxes and giving up their hard-earned resources. Caleb felt their frustration and fear. If they could be inspired, the sheriff's control could start to weaken. Suddenly, a commotion broke the quiet morning. One of the sheriff's deputies was shaking down a trader for more than his share. The trader tried to resist, arguing that he had already paid, but the deputy only laughed. "Sheriff Brannon doesn't care what you think," he said. "You pay or you'll see what happens to those who defy him." Caleb spurred his horse forward and dismounted, walking calmly toward the deputy. His boots scuffed against the dirt street and all eyes turned toward him. "That's enough," Caleb said, his voice steady and clear. "Leave the man alone," the deputy sneered. "And who are you to tell me what to do?" "I'm someone who will not watch injustice happen," Caleb replied. His gaze swept over the people gathered in the square. "You are not above the law and you are not above the people. Step back." For a moment the deputy hesitated. The presence of Caleb, calm yet firm, made him uncertain. No one in Dustrock had dared speak this way before. Finally, the deputy stepped aside, muttering threats under his breath, leaving the trader to collect his goods. The townspeople whispered among themselves. It was the first small victory they had seen in years. A murmur of hope spread through the square, quiet but growing. Caleb felt the shift. The sheriff's power depended on obedience, and each act of courage chipped away at that obedience. By midday, Caleb had walked the length of Dustrock's main street. He spoke with shopkeepers, miners, and even a few brave deputies who had grown tired of Brannon's cruelty. He listened to their stories of unfair fines, stolen goods, and threats against families. Caleb didn't promise them miracles. Instead, he promised that the town could stand together, that they could defend themselves without waiting for someone else to save them. "You've all lived too long in fear," Caleb said quietly to a small group of townsfolk huddled in an alley. "Brannon rules through fear, but fear is weak. Courage is strong. If we act together, we can show him that Dustrock belongs to its people, not one man." Some of the townsfolk nodded, their eyes widening with the realization that change might be possible. Caleb knew this was only the first step. They needed more than words, they needed action, and they needed a plan. That afternoon, Caleb decided it was time to confront Sheriff Brannon directly. He approached the sheriff's office, boots firm on the wooden steps. Inside, Brannon looked up from his desk, his face darkening when he saw Caleb. "Well, you're back," Brannon said, "and still full of ideas about justice. You think you can change Dustrock in one day?" "I don't think," Caleb said. "I know the people here are tired of your tricks, your threats, and your greed. They need to see that someone will stand for them. I'm that someone." Brannon laughed, a low and dangerous sound. "You've made a mistake, soldier. You think you can walk in here and shake my authority? Authority doesn't break so easily." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Authority built on fear isn't true authority. And the people of this town are ready to see that." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. He stood abruptly, towering over the desk. "I think you need a lesson." His hand reached toward his belt, brushing the handle of his blaster. Caleb's hand hovered near his weapon too, though he did not draw it. He understood that sometimes a strong stand was enough. "Brannon," he said calmly, "if you try to harm me, the town will see. They've already begun to question your rule. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Brannon's face twisted with anger. He took a step forward, voice rising. "You think words can stop me? I am Dustrock's law, and anyone who challenges me will regret it." At that moment, Caleb acted. He didn't aim to kill, nor to injure seriously. He only wanted to show the sheriff that his fear no longer controlled the town. He stepped forward and landed a firm, controlled punch squarely on Brannon's jaw. The sheriff stumbled backward, stunned, and the sound echoed in the small office. For a moment, silence hung in the air. The sheriff's deputies froze in shock, unsure whether to act. The townsfolk, peeking from windows and doorways, gasped. Caleb stood firm, eyes steady, as Brannon rubbed his jaw and glared at him. You dare," Brannon hissed, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. He realized the shift in power had begun. One punch had shaken more than his body, it had shaken his control over the town. Caleb stepped back, giving the sheriff space. "This is your warning," he said. "Stop hurting the people, step aside, or the town will take matters into its own hands." The sheriff's face was red with anger, but he did not strike back. The deputies looked at each other, uncertainty in their eyes. For the first time, they questioned their loyalty. Caleb's action had shown that the sheriff's authority was not absolute. Outside, the townspeople whispered excitedly. Some cheered quietly, others still hid, fearful but inspired. The mood of Dustrock had begun to change. Caleb knew that this was only the beginning. The town needed to organize, to stand together if they were to truly take back control from Brannon. He spent the next hours moving quietly through the town, speaking to those willing to listen. He encouraged shopkeepers to protect their goods, miners to speak out against unfair practices, and even a few brave deputies to question the sheriff's orders. Caleb taught them small strategies, how to watch for threats, how to signal each other, and how to act without panic. Every conversation built courage, and every act of resistance became a seed of hope. The sheriff, meanwhile, retreated to his office, plotting his next move. He could not undo what had happened, but he could try to intimidate the town into obedience again. Brannon sent a few deputies to patrol more aggressively to test the courage of the people. Caleb observed quietly from the shadows, ready to intervene, but letting the townsfolk take the first steps toward their own freedom. As the sun dipped low, painting the desert sky with shades of red and orange, Caleb gathered a small group of willing townsfolk in the abandoned mine at the edge of town. The group included a miner named Jeb, a trader named Lena, and a young deputy named Cole who had begun to doubt Brannon's rule. "We cannot fight Brannon with fists alone," Caleb said. "We need to be smart, strategic. He has weapons, allies, and fear on his side. We have courage, numbers, and the will to protect what's right. If we act carefully, we can take back our town without unnecessary violence." He showed them how to use tools and devices scavenged from old army supplies, simple defensive traps, and warning signals. He explained that the town's layout could be used to their advantage: alleyways for movement, rooftops for observation, and hidden passages for protection. The townsfolk listened intently, absorbing every word. By the end of the meeting, the group felt a mix of determination and excitement. For the first time, they believed they could make a difference. Caleb reminded them that Brannon would likely react aggressively, but that courage and unity could overcome fear. As night fell, Caleb returned to his camp outside the town. Dustrock was quieter than before, but the air felt different. There was energy, a sense of anticipation. The town had seen someone stand against the sheriff, and they had survived. The spark had been lit. Caleb sat by the fire, thinking of the coming days. He knew that the confrontation with Brannon was inevitable and that it would test the courage of the entire town. But he also knew something important: the people were ready. They just needed a leader to show them the way. Above, the twin moons rose, casting pale light across the desert. Caleb watched them silently, knowing that the frontier was full of dangers, both human and otherworldly. Dustrock was just one town, but it could become a symbol of hope for others. He was ready to fight, ready to guide, and ready to see the people reclaim their freedom. The sheriff might think he still held power, but Caleb knew better. Change had begun. And in the quiet of the desert night, Caleb Riker felt the first real sense of hope in Dustrock. The next morning, Dustrock was quieter than usual. But there was a difference in the air. People moved with purpose, their eyes sharper, their steps a little bolder. Caleb Riker rode through the main street, noticing the change. A miner walked past him without ducking at the sight of a deputy. Shopkeepers opened their doors with pride rather than fear. The spark he had lit yesterday was beginning to burn. Caleb dismounted near the town square. "It's time we take another step," he said quietly to a small group of townsfolk who had gathered around him. Among them were Jeb the miner, Lena the trader, and Cole, the young deputy who had begun doubting Brannon. Caleb had spent the night planning, thinking about the next move. The sheriff would not forget what had happened, and Brannon would try to regain control. "We can't confront Brannon yet," Caleb said. "He still has deputies who obey him blindly, but we can prepare. We can make the town safe, and we can show the people that standing together is stronger than fear." The group nodded. Caleb led them through the alleys, showing hidden corners, old passageways, and rooftops. He pointed out places where they could observe the town square without being seen. He taught them signals to warn each other if trouble came, and showed them how to use everyday tools as defenses. It wasn't about violence. It was about strategy. "Look around you," Caleb said. "Every shop, every home, every street corner is part of Dustrock. We can use them to protect ourselves. Brannon may have weapons, but he doesn't have the people united." By midday, Caleb and his small group had trained a dozen townsfolk. They learned to move silently, watch carefully, and communicate with hand signals. Even children helped by running messages between allies. The energy in the town was building, a quiet excitement that mixed with fear. Outside the town, Caleb noticed something unusual in the rocky hills. Small flickers of light moved between the rocks, like whispers of technology left behind long ago. Caleb's eyes narrowed. This frontier planet had dangers beyond corrupt men, and he knew that strange forces could appear at any moment. He made a note to keep watch on the hills, but for now, Dustrock needed attention. As the afternoon sun climbed high, Brannon emerged from his office. He moved through the streets with his deputies, trying to act as if nothing had happened. But Caleb could see the tension in Brannon's face. His usual confidence had faltered, replaced by suspicion and anger. Brannon stopped at a shop and demanded to see the owner's accounts. The townsfolk, emboldened by Caleb's presence and training, hesitated. Jeb stepped forward, arms folded. "We've paid our dues, Sheriff. You can't take more." Brannon's face turned red. "You'll regret this," he shouted. He motioned to his deputies, but some hesitated, looking at Caleb and the townsfolk. A small but powerful shift had begun. Brannon's authority was no longer absolute. Caleb stepped forward, voice firm. "Sheriff, the people of Dustrock are tired of your fear. They deserve fairness. You can choose to stop now, or you can watch the town stand against you." Brannon clenched his fists. "You think you can teach me what to do? You're just one man." Caleb shook his head. "I'm not alone, and neither are they." The confrontation drew a small crowd. People peeked from windows and doorways. Some whispered encouragement to the brave few in the street. Caleb saw hope in their eyes. For the first time, Dustrock was not silent. The sheriff left in anger, retreating to plan his next move. Caleb knew that Brannon would attempt something drastic soon. The town needed to be ready. He gathered the townsfolk at the abandoned mine again, this time more than 20 people. "We have to act before Brannon strikes," Caleb said, "but we must be careful. We won't fight blindly. We will protect ourselves and the town, and if he tries to attack, we will be ready." He divided the townsfolk into small teams. One team would guard the main street. Another would watch the alleys and rooftops. The rest would be ready to alert the town and help anyone in danger. Each team practiced moving quietly, signaling, and acting quickly. Even the young Deputy Cole learned to think strategically, realizing that loyalty to justice was stronger than loyalty to fear. By evening, Dustrock was transformed. The town that had been silent and tense now moved with quiet confidence. Caleb and the group stationed themselves in hidden positions, ready to watch for the sheriff's next move. The townsfolk, inspired by his courage and guidance, began to believe in themselves. As night fell, a patrol of Brannon's deputies moved through the streets. They tried intimidation, checking shops and questioning townsfolk. But the people stood firm, signaling silently to each other. Caleb watched from the shadows, ready to intervene if necessary. The patrol passed without incident, but it was a sign. The sheriff's power was no longer absolute. Late that night, Caleb and a few trusted townsfolk climbed to the rooftops to watch the town from above. The wind blew cold across the desert, and the stars shone brightly above. Caleb's eyes scanned the rocky hills once more. The faint flickers of light he had seen earlier were still there. Something strange, something unknown, lingered on the planet. But tonight, Dustrock was safe. "Do you think Brannon will come back tomorrow?" Lena asked quietly, her voice tense. "He will," Caleb said. "He won't forget what happened, but he will also see that the town is not afraid anymore, and that will make him cautious. We must be ready for anything." The following morning, the town awoke to another challenge. One of Brannon's deputies tried to demand extra payment from a miner. The miner, emboldened by the training and Caleb's example, refused. "I've paid what I owe," he said firmly. "You can take nothing more." The deputy looked at Caleb, who was standing nearby. The man hesitated, unsure if he should act. Finally, he backed down, muttering under his breath. The townsfolk cheered quietly, but the celebration was cautious. They knew Brannon would not give up easily. Caleb spent the day moving through the town, speaking with different groups, listening to their fears and encouraging their courage. Each conversation strengthened the town's resolve. He reminded them that their safety depended on unity and careful action, not reckless fighting. By afternoon, the sheriff made his move. He sent 2 of his deputies to the square, hoping to intimidate the townsfolk. But the people were ready. Teams signaled each other, and townsfolk stepped out, showing they were no longer afraid. Brannon's men hesitated, glancing at the growing crowd and the determined faces of the people. Caleb stepped into the center of the square, facing the deputies. "Leave now," he said firmly. "The town will not accept threats. You will not harm anyone." The deputies looked around, realizing that the town stood together. For the first time, they felt doubt. Slowly, they backed away, and the sheriff's attempt at intimidation failed. The townsfolk whispered in amazement. They had stood up without violence, without panic, and the sheriff's men had yielded. Caleb's training and courage had given them power they had never thought they could have. That night, Caleb gathered the leaders of the town once more. "Tomorrow," he said, "Brannon may try something bigger, but we are ready. We have courage, strategy, and unity. The town belongs to the people now, not one man. We will face whatever comes together." The group nodded, feeling a mix of fear and excitement. For the first time in years, they believed in themselves. Dustrock was no longer silent. Dustrock was alive. Outside, the desert winds blew through the streets, carrying the smell of sand and hope. Caleb watched from the rooftop, eyes scanning the horizon. Somewhere in the hills, the strange flickers of light danced again, mysterious and silent. But Dustrock had found its strength, and no fear could take it away. The twin suns of Dustrock's horizon burned orange and red as Caleb Riker surveyed the town from the hills above. Today was the day. Sheriff Brannon would make his move, and Caleb knew the people of Dustrock had to stand together. He adjusted the strap of his pack, checking the simple weapons and tools he had prepared with the townsfolk. Every detail mattered. Every street, alley, and rooftop had been studied. The town was ready. Caleb looked down at the streets below. Dustrock had changed. Shopkeepers were already outside, standing in front of their stores with determined expressions. Children peeked from behind safe corners, watching with wide eyes. Miners and farmers had gathered quietly in the alleys, ready to help where needed. Even a few of the sheriff's own deputies, like Cole, stood on the rooftops, signaling that the people now had allies inside Brannon's ranks. From his vantage point, Caleb could see Sheriff Brannon approaching in his usual swagger. His deputies flanked him, weapons visible, but his confidence was strained. Brannon's smirk was thin, almost forced. He had underestimated the town before, and now he was uncertain. Caleb felt no fear. He felt anticipation, a calm certainty that courage and unity would win. As Brannon entered the main street, he shouted to the townsfolk, "You think you can defy me? I am the law of Dustrock. Step aside or you will regret it." The townsfolk did not move. They stood firmly, eyes forward, backs straight. Caleb stepped into the square, facing the sheriff directly. "Brannon," he said, voice strong and steady, "this town belongs to the people. You no longer have power over them. Today ends your rule of fear." The sheriff's eyes blazed with anger. You've made this personal. "You will pay for this insolence?" Caleb did not respond with threats. He simply raised a hand, signaling to the hidden townsfolk. In response, the people began moving carefully into strategic positions, rooftops, alleyways, and behind carts. Each group acted silently but deliberately, creating a sense of organization that Brannon had never seen in Dustrock. The sheriff's deputies, confused by the sudden coordination, hesitated. Caleb noticed the doubt in their eyes. Even Cole, now fully committed to justice, moved to block a deputy from taking aggressive action. The balance of power was shifting. Brannon roared in frustration and lunged forward, attempting to assert his authority. Caleb stepped aside quickly, dodging the first blow and striking with controlled precision to unbalance the sheriff. Brannon stumbled but regained his footing. This was no longer a simple conflict. It was a battle of courage against fear, of strategy against tyranny. From the rooftops, townsfolk began signaling with hand gestures and whistles. Caleb moved swiftly through the square, coordinating the movements. Crates were shifted to block entrances, and simple traps prepared the streets for any aggressive moves. The sheriff realized that the town had been transformed into a united front. He could no longer act freely, and the fear that had once protected him was gone. Brannon's face twisted in anger. "Do you think you can humiliate me in my own town?" he shouted. He raised his weapon, aiming at Caleb, but before he could fire, Cole stepped forward from the rooftop, shouting, "Drop it, Sheriff! The town won't follow you anymore." The sheriff faltered. He saw the people standing tall, ready to defend themselves and each other. His mind raced. Violence could escalate, and he could lose everything. Caleb used the moment of hesitation to speak clearly and firmly. "Brannon," he said, "you've had your chance. Now it's time to answer for your actions. Step aside peacefully or face consequences." "The town has the right to defend itself." Brannon's jaw tightened. For the first time, he felt real fear. The townsfolk were no longer silent, no longer intimidated. He had ruled through fear for years, and now his control was gone. His deputies began lowering their weapons, unsure of where their loyalty truly lay. The sheriff glared at Caleb, then at the town. His anger boiled, but he knew he was outnumbered and outmatched. Slowly, he lowered his weapon and stepped back. Caleb approached cautiously, keeping his eyes on Brannon. "You will answer for your actions before the law," Caleb said. "Not through fear, not through force. The people of Dustrock will see justice done." The townsfolk cheered quietly, relief washing over them. They had seen courage in action, and it had worked. Brannon was no longer untouchable. Caleb turned to the people. "Today you stood together. You defended your town. Remember this feeling. Remember that fear does not have to rule you. Dustrock belongs to all of you now." The sheriff's deputies quietly surrendered their weapons and left them in a pile at the edge of the square. Even those who had once been loyal to Brannon realized they had chosen the wrong side. The sheriff, seeing that his authority was broken, finally backed away into his office. Caleb did not chase him. The sheriff's defeat was clear, and the law would handle him properly. There was no need for further violence. The town had reclaimed its streets and its freedom. As night fell, Caleb and the townsfolk gathered in the square. Fires were lit, casting warm light across the faces of those who had stood together. Children played cautiously, parents smiled, and the town felt alive again. For the first time in years, Dustrock breathed freely. Caleb spoke to the town, his voice carrying across the square. "This is only the beginning. Dustrock is yours to protect, to care for, and to grow. Remember what you are capable of. Remember that courage and unity are stronger than fear. Sheriff Brannon may return, but he will never rule this town again." The townsfolk cheered, voices mixing in harmony. Caleb smiled, seeing hope in their eyes. He had not done this alone. The people of Dustrock had chosen to stand with him, and together they had won. From the hills beyond the town, strange flickers of light danced again, hinting at mysteries yet to come. Caleb watched quietly. He knew the frontier held dangers far beyond corrupt sheriffs. Alien technology, uncharted lands, and unknown threats waited in the desert. But Dustrock was safe for now. The town had found its courage, and that was stronger than any unknown danger. Cole, the young deputy, approached Caleb. I never thought I could help like this," he said quietly. "But you showed me how to stand for what's right." Caleb nodded. "Courage doesn't come from one person. It comes from all of you working together. Today, Dustrock showed real courage." The sheriff remained in his office, defeated but alive. The army authorities would deal with him properly, ensuring justice without unnecessary harm. Caleb knew that his work in Dustrock was done, at least for now. He had sparked change, taught courage, and helped a town reclaim its freedom. As dawn approached, Caleb prepared to leave. Dustrock was quiet again, but now it was quiet with peace rather than fear. The townsfolk gathered to see him off, offering nods of gratitude and smiles of respect. Caleb mounted his horse, looking back at the town one last time. "Keep your town safe," he said quietly to himself, "and remember what courage can do." He rode into the desert, the twin suns rising behind him, casting long shadows across the sand. The frontier was wide, dangerous, and full of challenges, but Caleb Riker had shown that even in the most lawless towns, courage, strategy, and unity could prevail. Dustrock would never forget that day, and Caleb knew that other towns needed his guidance too. As he disappeared into the desert, the people of Dustrock began rebuilding. Shops reopened fully, children played openly, and miners returned to their work with pride. The sheriff's office was sealed, awaiting authorities. Dustrock had reclaimed its streets, its homes, and its hearts. The town had learned that fear could be defeated, and that courage could inspire change far stronger than any weapon. Caleb rode into the horizon, knowing that more towns, more challenges, and more dangers awaited him. But he also knew this. Wherever injustice thrived, there would always be someone ready to stand, someone ready to inspire, and someone ready to fight for what was right. And Caleb Riker, Army Scout and Protector, would always be among them. The frontier stretched endlessly ahead, full of mystery and possibility. Dustrock's story was over for now, but the spirit of the town would endure, a beacon for others across the wild, uncharted lands. And Caleb, ever watchful, ever ready, rode onward into the unknown, leaving a town stronger, freer, and braver than it had ever been before. Caleb knew that the next confrontation with Brannon would be the ultimate test. The town had taken its first steps toward freedom, but the final battle was coming. And when it came, Dustrock would not stand alone.